So Goldfields Pride is collecting stories from people in 3 local government areas in the Goldfields regions. That's Pyrenees, Loddon and Central Goldfields. And the reason we're reaching out to people in those areas and collecting those stories is because they are the 3 areas in our region, here in Western Victoria and in particular around the Goldfields, that have the lowest scores in the Local Government Equality Index, which measures what local governments are doing to support LGBTQIA+ people in their areas. So as we start to reach the 40-year anniversary of decriminalisation, it's important for us to check in and to see what LGBTQIA+ people's experiences are like, particularly in those areas of the state where there's still some way to go towards full LGBTQIA+ inclusion. So we can see what happens when you start the work here in Ballarat and the impacts that that's going to have on the community in the years that follow, and that can act as a good example to other local government areas in adjoining parts of the state. I think the LGBTQIA+ community in some of our adjoining more rural areas is there, but it's not as visible, and therefore what the project's seeking to do is to collect those stories from LGBTQIA+ people that have lived or are now living in those areas to say, we're here, we're visible, it's time for local councils and local service providers to act on our needs. We often look at smaller rural and regional areas and think they're backwaters, they're bigoted, but actually so often it's because we don't have the visibility there. The councils or service providers may not just have considered what they can do to be more inclusive. So when that option is put to them, we're seeing, well, they're taking that opportunity to consider what they can do. So that gives me a sense of hope. There's a receptiveness and a want and a desire to be able to become more inclusive. It's just a case of putting those stories in front of them and making the case for change. So I'm interested in collecting stories both pre and post the advent of decriminalisation. So I'm interested in hearing from people that were around before the laws were changed to see what differences they've noticed in that particular period of time, pre and post decriminalisation, but also interested in hearing from more younger people and what their experiences of growing up in these rural and regional areas is like. How do they experience discrimination? How do they experience isolation? And what's their experience like as an LGBTQIA+ person growing up in a rural or regional part of the state? And I'm really interested in connecting the law reform, which is looking at a parliamentary process that changed the law, to the lived experiences of people that have lived both pre and post decriminalisation here in Victoria. So once you're able to connect what the law means to real people and bring in those real stories, then you're much more likely to be able to achieve law reform. And that's why these storytelling processes, so that we understand the impacts of past law reform, in this case decriminalisation, are so important, because they pave the steps for future law reform. There's lots of smaller things councils can do, whether this is flying the rainbow flag, getting involved in one of our local LGBTQIA+ events like the Frolic Festival, or marching at Pride March with Midsumma and showing queer kids that are gathered there that their town that they grew up in is inclusive and supportive. That makes a huge difference. And there's also things that councils can do, like establish an advisory committee, develop an action plan, through to looking at how their services can be more inclusive through going for rainbow tick accreditation. So there are all kinds of things that we hope, or that I hope, that this report will be the impetus for, and to see smaller shires in our region taking strong action to support their community, because in the end that doesn't just benefit the LGBTQIA+ community that live there now, it sends a signal to people that might be thinking of moving to rural or regional areas that this is an area that is inclusive and accepting of LGBTQIA+ people. And it also says that we're a community that celebrates our diversity as well too, and that's something that we should all be really proud of.